Father in heaven, we're grateful for the opportunity that we can be able to meet together tonight as a planning commission and as citizens of North Ogden City. We're grateful for the opportunity to serve and ask you to bless it as we discuss the items tonight, that we can do so in a kind and civil manner, and that we can know how to best serve and plan for the future needs of our city. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please rise and please pledge allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll make note that Commissioners Watson and Weber excused tonight. And we will, our steady repeat public tonight will forego our opening meeting statement. It's posted online. Any ex parte communications on the R1 agenda tonight? All right, well, we'll open up for public comment if anybody would like to address the Planning Commission at this time. 3 more minutes, you'd have been done. If anybody would like to address the Planning Commission, please step up to the microphone and state your name and address. Do so. If you're here for item number 5, we'll give public time to speak on that. We have no public comment tonight. We'll go ahead and move to our administrative item number 5, subdivision ordinance 2022-14. Consideration and action on administrative application for preliminary approval of the Mountain Valley Villas subdivision phase 4. This is one lot located at approximately 800 east, 2700 north. Our presenter is our planning tech, Kai Johnson. Kai.
Good evening, Chair and Commission. So this is a one lot subdivision, but there is street dedication, which is why it's coming for you this evening. So it's located approximately 2700 north and 800 east. So this is phase 4 of the Mountain Valley Villa subdivision. It is an administrative item, so I will read the decision statement. When the Planning Commission is acting as a land use authority, it is acting in an administrative capacity. It has a limited degree of discretion. Examples of administrative applications are conditional permits, design reviews, and subdivision. Administrative applications must be approved by the Planning Commission if the application demonstrates compliance with the approval criteria. Scott, can you bring up the plat, please? So you can see here on the plat the lot being shown in the area that will need to be dedicated to the city. And the issue that is kind of still a little undecided, I've been speaking with John, and it sounds like that we have our answer, but there is a protection strip that is being proposed at the end of the street there. That's a 1 foot wide protection strip. And it sounds, after reading our code, it sounds like that will need to be removed from this plat altogether, and that will need to be dedicated as part of the right of way, because the code states that it needs to be carried to the subdivision boundary. So that's the issue that will need to be addressed on this plat before final approval, is that will need to be removed. And we'll have the dedication clearly defined on the plat. You have any questions regarding the approval of this subdivision?
Is that marked on there as the temporary turnaround?
That's what I'm saying.
Is that what that? Okay.
So it's not at the end of the road, it's.
Is that on the existing plat, phase 3?
Yes,
That one is, okay.
and it's actually, that one's physically constructed too. It's a little different since there's probably a timing discrepancy between the development on the north and this development, that you've got asphalt, curb gutter, and some other improvements that once this road goes through would have to be removed and some utilities realigned and some laterals redone. But in the interim, which could be months to several years before that developer to the north comes in, we allowed paving of that half circle temporary turnaround just for cleanliness of those single family homes on that lot, those lots.
Okay.
This lot was not included originally just because it was at the end of the road and it was the turnaround.
I'm not certain why they didn't use it in the phase 3.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Quick one. What was the purpose of the 1 foot? I remember that when we approved the other subdivision, but
So that essentially the property from the north would need to pay to connect to the street in some way.
And this would remove that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
by
ordinance.
code, you have to take your utilities,
Okay.
public infrastructure to the boundary, subdivision boundary.
Protection strips work a little differently on private utilities, as far as I understand, but from public utilities, we reread the code and had John check into it too, because I think from our Title 11, Title 12 rewrite to the new Title 11, that's either been clarified or we just wanted to make sure that that language is correct, so the city attorney will help us out, make sure that that's done. As far as this being a preliminary plat that would then go forward to final, it doesn't substantively change anything as far as recommendation from staff. It's still a one lot subdivision. There's dedication, there's opportunity for the developer to hold off on doing that actual road work through escrow or bonding or whatever else they want to do, in a continuation of Burning Lane there. And lot 28 as it is has 40 or 50 feet of asphalt frontage that when they apply for building permit for a residence on that lot, they do have some street frontage that they're touching with curb and gutter. So there's likely a timing question about just when this will connect to what I imagine is future Hall Orchard phases, or who, if that's sold, the property owner to the north.
So typically a protection strip is intended for, if you were, say, for example, the lot 22 on there was owned by somebody, where that street fronts there, that lot 22. If he was to build that whole street, then you could put a protection strip there. So if that lot wanted access to that new street, they would need to pay their share of the
The
road.
one on the west
have.
side, if the property owner if lot 28 were owned by another party, right?
Yes.
The west
Yeah,
side.
no, I'm sorry, I'm saying 22, being that that's not part of it,
Yeah, so this is
but
actually lot 22 all the way along this line. So lot 22 exists all the way up here.
yeah,
But yes, you're right that it would be,
that's
Like-
typically what the intent for protection strip is the parallel, when you develop a full improved road parallel to another owner's property. Then technically, through development, you each share half the cost of the road. So that ensures that gets paid once they want to develop or whatever. But the reason why they're not out at the end of roads is usually hostage negotiations, Somebody wants to develop land or whatever. So,
I want to note that Johnson Webb has joined us on Zoom.
okay. All right, would like the applicant like to speak to us?
I can't, if there's any questions, I don't know.
Does anybody have any questions? Let me for the record.
Yeah, Pat Burns, 1407 North Mountain Road. So I actually own lot 22. My personal house is going there. The whole point of all of this is lot 28. I'm just putting up a temporary barn. So I have a barn kit that I want to get put in. Wouldn't give me a building permit unless I did all this. And I'm not sure why still I have to do all this just to put a barn up. And that's why I actually did put the hostage strip. That's what we actually do call it, a hostage strip. Was just so that if I have to spend $100,000 putting a road in, I'm not just gonna give that to a developer for free. The last one I was in here for, I had a hostage strip on that. That stopped me from actually buying the property. I had to sell it to those other guys and my piece by the food bank.
Oh, right.
But I do that on every development, and sometimes they get shut down, sometimes they don't, but, the only comment I have is, I'm just trying to put a barn in, not a house or not anything, but so with the ordinance, with something, I actually do this for a living, and I'm still a little confused.
Sure. So you had a remainder parcel there, that if you had an agricultural use, you could have used I'm gonna build a barn or an accessory building that's as related to a primary use on that piece of property, but you've got a zoning there of residential R18 or R110, and there's no real appreciable farming that's happening on a 16,000 square foot lot. So the barn, as it's related to, becomes a primary use on the structure. In a single family zone, the same as we don't allow anybody to just buy a lot and throw up an accessory building. You have to have a primary use before you have a secondary use. So your primary use in this case would be a barn, as long as it has a kitchen, a bathroom, and a sleeping facility. So you'll be
I
building a
actually-
single family home.
I agree completely with you.
Yeah.
Lot 22 is my personal house. So I first came in and just made it all one big lot.
Yeah, we wouldn't permit that because Burns Lane, as it's drawn right now, is about 900 feet long from the intersection of Mountain Road. So it exceeds our cul-de-sac lane. So the road has to go through. By permitting that to be part of all one lot and then to bifurcate it in the future, we're kind of like roundabout circumventing the ordinance, because you could then subdivide the lot and get an accessory building on this lot 28 that doesn't, again, have a primary use on it, doesn't have a single family home on it. So really, we're just following that primary use versus secondary use requirement and having you subdivide it. And I don't know if doing Mountain Valley Villas Phase 3, what the reasoning is in leaving it a remainder parcel as opposed to creating a lot. Maybe it's just timing and intentional
Well,
sale. but-
because according to your code, if I have 2 extra lots, I then have to put the temporary turnaround up there, and I don't have enough space to put a temporary turnaround, so I couldn't put 2 more lots.
I remember that.
And yeah,
Yeah,
And
that
so-
wasn't too long ago.
yeah. And so that's why we put the temporary turnaround down there. And plus the Hall brothers, I know they're doing the upper part. They don't plan on doing the other part for a long time. And so I didn't want to have a dead end, paying $100,000 for a road.
Mhm.
And how long is it Burns Lane?
From,
It's over 900 feet.
yeah, from the end of here to where it wraps down and touches Monroe, it's approximately 900 feet. Our
Didn't we
cul-de-sac,
1,500 feet?
no, that's our block length. Our cul-de-sac length is 600 feet, the longest you can have a cul-de-sac. So streets with a temporary turnaround can exceed 600 feet because there's an intention of them to connect in the future at some point. But this Burns Lane will never be able to be a proper cul-de-sac. You know, at the time that the developer to the north is ready to develop, the road will have to go through. And that could be years from now. But essentially you're having to create from a remainder parcel to an actual legal lot parcel. And the city has this opportunity through the preliminary final plat to really get Burns Lane dedication.
And I don't mind dedicating. That's the next point I wanted to bring up too, was I will dedicate it. I don't have a problem with that. Not, I can show you 50 pieces in North Ogden that have been dedicated, not 50, but 10. They've been dedicated. This piece was dedicated to North Ogden. What I don't want to have to happen, and that's what I'll ask the city council, is there's mention of me having to pay to put the infrastructure in, and I have less than 2 years to do it. Why would I ever spend $100,000 to put up a barn? It's not, I was gonna put a barn up. I really want. to
Well,
put a
that's the
barn up.
ordinance. So you can get an extension in 2 years. Like, once you have approval, you have 2 years to put the improvements in. And if you don't, I think we allow up to 2 1-year extensions
So
beyond that.
What about all the pieces? I'm dedicating the piece to North Ogden City.
we can, that's.
Yeah,
where-
so if you enter, I would imagine there's some way like, hey, here's a development agreement, you're dedicating it and escrowing the money, because it's a dead end road. It's so oftentimes like, I think people have dedicated half the roads or things like that and put the escrow up, but it doesn't make sense for the city to have it built. And so then there's ways that extend that 2-year requirement, but then the city is, you know, the funds are in control of the city in a sense. They say, hey, we want to finish this road, and triggers it to happen. So
And if the trend line continues in 2 years, the money you escrow today probably wouldn't build that road, right? And so that's where there's a limit to what that escrow looks like.
Well, and that's what I do want to talk this is just full disclosure. If I have to pay for the stupid road to put in a barn, it's a temporary barn. It's literally a barn kit. I'm not, that would be,
And it's across the street from your house?
it's next door to my house, yeah.
On a separate parcel.
yeah, well, as the ordinance sits now, that would be, you'd be, to record this plat, you'd be required to escrow the funds to finish that road. You're not required to build it, but then that kicks into the time thing. Now, I don't know by way of development agreement or whatever, if you can defer that time, but you still gotta put the money up, so at that point,
Well, I could put it
Does it-
on.
you know, does it matter?
I'd
So,
bond it with my bank, but
Mr. Burns, you're 2702 is where your primary residence is?
1407.
no, that's gonna be his house, lot
Yes, I'm
22.
building it. It's going to be his house.
Oh, it's not there. I see.
Yeah, sorry.
Here though, right?
Yeah. Okay, any other questions for the applicant?
No, and just from a staff perspective, the clarity on the protection strip and escrow and everything doesn't change at preliminary plat. Final plats are administrative, so staff feels comfortable moving this forward, knowing that what, in staff's opinion, what preliminary is granting you is kind of understanding where the roads are gonna go and the number of lots that you're getting out of this subdivision. So you couldn't move from here and go to a final that's 2 lots, you know, you're getting 1 lot essentially, but all those other items we can discuss between now, should the council or planning commission approve the preliminary and your final plat and recordation and all of that.
Okay, and I don't have a problem with that hostage strip. Okay, I just do that. Okay, thank you.
I think. No, I guess if John's on with us, John, isn't there a state code or state law about that?
I'm not aware of one for protection strips. The issue we're running into is our code specifically says they're only allowed on perimeter streets, which are like, we did one up at Stone Ridge or Stone Crest. I
The
can't remember.
perimeter of streets, right?
No, it says if it's a perimeter street. So the idea is
Oh.
if the street is going along, like what Scott was saying, is if lot 90 or lot 22 wasn't part of the subdivision,
Yeah,
then
you could put it along that edge.
you can put it along that edge. Our code doesn't really talk about these stub streets, these ones that are technically internal to the development until they get to like that northern edge. Our code doesn't call that a perimeter street, and that's kind of the language we're struggling with. You know, from a staff perspective, you know, a hostage strip under the city code is not offensive to anybody. It's just this question of, in this case with the language, does it apply? And so it might turn into a situation where the council have to change the language to allow for it. I do know there are cities that don't allow perimeter or hostage strips at all, but so I'm not sure that there's a state code that says they have to be, but I'll double check that as a question.
Well, no, I guess more, not so much the protection strip with state code, but the code is it regulated by state? When you develop a piece of property, you are required to take the utilities or infrastructure to the boundaries, like what our ordinance says.
Well, so I think it's not a state code. But I do think that there's for streets, it is state, but utilities aren't. And in fact, I'm not sure that we would require the extension of utilities. The idea would be if the people to the north had to make that connection, then they would have to come down and make it for their development. We wouldn't make the, go any further than they needed to.
Okay, so that's one thing. You're really just curb gutter and asphalt to the end. If you're not running utilities, then if All Brothers need to come get the sewer, they come down now, or you call them and say, hey, do you want to pay to extend this before I pave the road? Because it'll be cheaper now than later. So. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, John.
Scott, what I was hearing you say was that when this becomes a lot, an R18, I believe it is, that can he build just a temporary barn on that?
No, so it's the same as any other subdivision lot. It's the same with that remainder parcel. Remainder parcels are typically left because it saves you property tax dollars. You don't pay property taxes on a buildable lot on remainder parcels. So it's a way for you to phase your subdivision as a developer or landowner and pay a reduced agricultural use type of property tax on it. And there are certain protections for property owners about accessory buildings that can be built as they relate to agriculture. And I think that I would disagree that the barn that you're wanting to build is in relation to primarily an agricultural use on the property. So we can talk about that if you want to, about that interpretation. That's my interpretation. My recommendation was you make it a building lot, but at the time, and we talked about this, Pat and I, when you make it a building lot, the requirement is that it's a home. And a home, I don't care if it's 1% home and 99% garage, it has to be, meet those definitions. So that's restroom facilities, cooking facilities, and sleeping facilities. And that's the same with any other, like, you know, we have these up in the cove that happen every once in a while. Somebody buys 2 lots and what they really want is a 3,000 square foot basketball court. They put in a bathroom, a kitchenette, and a sleeping facility. They built another house. But what they've really built is just a large accessory building. And that's kind of what this would be at this point. And then you determine whether or not your investment in it is worth resale, or you tear it down because it's worth more to tear it down than having a building lot at that point. But that's what permits you to have the building permit. So when he applied for his building permit, we denied it based on, one, it doesn't fit in my opinion, the definition of something like a pole barn, which you have, cities have limited ability to require a building permit on. And if it's strictly this barn use, then it's the accessory to what would be a primary use that doesn't exist. And then my concern about having lot 22 wrap around and be U-shaped around the road is that once you grant that extension of that lot, so now I own both sides of the road, it makes it really difficult and or impossible in the future to say, no, Hall Orchard halls have developed, so now you must connect because you're kind of cutting through somebody's private property. And if you dedicate it, then there's a legal question of whether or not it constitutes 1 lot or 2. So like, it's just a lot of,
Yeah, we ran into this once before
it's a lot of process. To
where
get
we
something
were
that should
gonna
be
build,
registered.
we needed to build a road right between their house and their barn.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I apologize.
I don't
you're
think-
kind of
and it was
caught
a problem.
in the situation of, you know, doing the full process to get through a small one, but it just is protecting.
Not that he wants more process, but is there another zoning option that would fit his needs here, or is that? I mean, I understand that the subdivision sits in his own, but couldn't we?
It's not large enough to rezone back to RE20. I think it comes down to the definition of primary or secondary use. You'd have to prove that my desire to have a barn on X piece of property is the primary use in relation to how I'm utilizing this property, as opposed
He's got a
to,
big garden
I'd
and a
like
bunch
a
of other
big-
stuff.
I'd like a big barn to store whatever.
I mean, my intention and I obviously, well, out of administrative action, I'm gonna vote whatever way our ordinances say, but my intention and when we help recommend these ordinances are created is that we will create offensive situations for neighbors or something that adversely affect property values. And I mean, to me, I think a barn sitting alone on a lot is, I don't know what we do to allow that. I don't see why that's a negative thing.
Well, if you could have, this is the potential for the negative thing, in my opinion is. Subdivision goes up and it's individually sold off to different owners who go out and build several thousand square foot steel buildings on them as a primary use and never build a home. So you end up with a subdivision of accessory buildings with no homes on it. Is that offensive? I mean, it's not offensive for like the onesie twosie case, but we can't control that versus this is now going to become just a storage subdivision and not a living subdivision.
Seems like the least efficient way to have a storage facility. I
You
mean,
know, you never, it's
But like some people
I
might
guess
go
I-
buy a lot up 2 blocks away from their house and build a garage on it.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
so it
that's
doesn't
true.
necessarily make sense, but
Doesn't make economic
there's one
sense.
in our neighborhood that's that way.
Okay, well, I guess I just look at it in the primary things that people care about here is open space, things like that. It seems to preserve those things. So this isn't really a question of,
we've been consistent on how this is applied. You just haven't seen it because typically it doesn't have road dedication. So we have had lots of subdivisions where 2 lots have had to be combined in order to build a swimming pool as a primary use on what would have been the adjoining lot. Or this often happens in cul-de-sacs, actually. The end user of the cul-de-sac buys 2 lots, so they can get their house and their accessory building. But they go back through a plat amendment that's an administrative process with no street dedication.
Yeah.
And combine the lots.
Jenny Taylor.
And we've processed dozens of those in the last several years of individual lot combinations. This one being one of those unique cases where it's under 10 lots, but does have road dedication. The Planning Commission has to weigh on. So you're really saying, does lot 28 comply with the underlying zoning regulations? And then from that's really the Planning Commission's piece of this. Can we allow a protection strip And does this comply with our other underlying zoning regulation? Everything else post that, as far as application, how the building permit happens, is really an administrative act that
Makes sense.
happens at, by, building official
Staff
approval
level.
and staff level
Yeah.
approval. So, if it, if the applicant wasn't here for it, for that specific reason, you'd really be reviewing whether a 16,300 and whatever square foot lot meets the requirements.
Thank you. Let's open up, since we have some public here, if any public would like to comment on this item, step up and do so at this time. All right, discussion. Motion.
As stated, I think it's on an administrative item, we really say, does this fit the ordinance, yes or no, and it seems to.
Yeah, the only thing based on what's before us now, that we pass is the protection strip as said in the staff report needs to be removed. That is in the staff report, right? Scott?
It might not be, because we've been
Oh,
trying to determine the answer to that question as the staff report came up. So that would be part of the recommendation from planning commission. But also, I don't think that between
but this
planning,
is
the
just
planning
preliminary.
commission and
so-
preliminary plat, I don't believe can pass a recommendation or entitle this subdivision in a way that goes against the code. So if the strict reading of the code is for perimeter streets, not for the perpendicular end streets, that would be taken care of prior to final plat. It doesn't hurt for the planning commission to say, as presented or, discussed by the city attorney to remove that protection strip based on a reading of the code.
The applicant did mention that he was going to talk to the city council about this. I'm failing to understand how an administrative item goes to the city council still. So that's something we should be able to pass.
Yeah, so protection strips in general, depending on, regardless of how it's read by the code, like on the parallel side of the perpendicular, that's an approval by the city council. Also, I think that if there's a development agreement passed or a discussion about the escrow, in timing, that could be done through development agreement as a legislative act by the city council, because they could offer that extension based on timing. Again, though, the preliminary subdivision plat authorizing or entitling one lot and this road configuration doesn't really change in your approval.
I'll take a stab at the motion.
I barely understand it.
I will, but I don't understand is in the recommendation, beyond the recommendation for approval, you have like in phase 1, lot 3 is to be expanded to include the existing home. Do you need all that in the motion?
I don't care, I can speak to that.
Yeah.
I just didn't update my recommendation and.
Okay.
That much.
No, I was just sorting, do I need to include that or not? So I'll make a motion that we grant preliminary approval of the Mountain Valley Villas subdivision, subject to the conditions in the staff report.
To add the removal of the protection strip as per the code. 'Cause I don't think that was in the staff report.
It's not.
Can you add that to my motion?
I just heard through a discussion of the city attorney. Removal of the 1 foot parking strip.
Okay.
Can I clarify your motion?
Yes,
So
please.
your motion is to approve the item with the recommendations from the staff and to recommend the removal of the 1 foot quote unquote, protection strip, for lack of a more offensive term.
Sounds good.
Is that, did I?
Yes,
get that?
thank you.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Commissioner Mason,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Nancaro,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes,
Commissioner White. He's nodding his head yes,
I asked,
he's happy.
and I vote yes. All right. Now we'll open up for public comment again, if anybody would like to address us. All right, remarks from planning commissioners. Any remarks tonight? Okay. Planning director.
I did, I just, one comment would be that I said this meeting would go 40 minutes. And if I talk slower, I would be right on.
Scott, you have anything for us?
The party for, is December 6th, so please bring your families and come out and enjoy the holiday party. Katie Gerard should be sending out an email if you haven't received that. Another thing is that communications from Katie, I reached out to a handful of you about some jackets that we were having embroidered, and her primary means of communication with the planning commission is the at North Ogden or nogden.org email address. Or North Ogden City. So do you prefer your personal email addresses, and are you okay if I give that to Katie for general communication with you?
Yes, and yes.
Yes.
I'm also, yes. yeah.
All right,
As a matter of fact, I should set up an email rule. If you guys know you can do that, just forward
That's true.
from North Ogden or whatever.
Yeah, but they didn't even remember how to log into it. I haven't been able to log into my North Ogden one for 3 years.
Yeah.
there's that.
I know. We've tried to connect.
It's every 2 weeks.
The only other thing is I believe we've met our training requirement. I really appreciate everybody coming and attending that and getting 4 hours. We do have, for every meeting you attend, it builds up. And so everyone, we have a really good, well-attending planning commission, so we'll meet that requirement for the state. And we have just 2 city council meetings left. If you're interested, the 22nd and then December 13th, we won't be holding one. As far as I know, the week of Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's for city council. And then we'll put our planning commission schedule should be whole. Left alone, we'll have both meetings in December, as far as I understand, if we have items to hear. That's all I have.
Okay. Kai, anything from you? All right. John, anything from you?
No, I don't have anything to add. Scott covered it.
All right. Well, thank you. Motion to adjourn.
I still got 7 minutes.
I'll make the motion to adjourn 7 minutes.
All in favor?
Uh,
Aye. Only speak up if you oppose.
I was 6 minutes.
Quick for 7 more minutes. But I feel you, what a fun job.
Yeah, you think that's fun?
Actually, let me.
All that. All the stuff now for the big suit.
You know, I actually feel worried. I just.
Are you doing